October 2021. Kabul has fallen. The last U.S. military transport has lifted off Afghan soil. 20 years of war officially over. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., a quiet bureaucratic document lands on a desk inside the Pentagon. It is an audit report. The Department of Defense has attempted to account for its own finances. It has failed for the third consecutive year. Not partially failed, not almost passed, failed completely. The largest military institution on Earth, with a budget bigger than the next 10 countries combined, cannot tell you where the money went. $2 trillion spent. $2 trillion that no complete, verified paper trail can fully account for. So tonight, we asked the question that almost nobody in mainstream media has asked clearly enough. Where did the money actually go? And who decided you didn't need to know? But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to September 12, 2001. The morning after. Congress was still in shock. The nation was grieving. And within 72 hours, the authorization for use of military force was signed into law. Blank check language. Broad war powers were handed to the executive branch. No defined enemy, no defined end date, no defined budget ceiling. That single document, passed on September 18, 2001, would become the legal foundation for military operations in over 80 countries over the next 2 decades. By 2002, the defense budget was climbing fast. By 2008, annual Pentagon spending had nearly doubled compared to pre-September 11th levels. And here is the critical detail most people miss. The Department of Defense had never once passed an independent financial audit before the wars began. Not once. Congress first mandated DoD auditing in 1990. For nearly 3 decades, the Pentagon simply did not comply. No consequences followed. Now, here is where the scale of what happened becomes almost impossible to process calmly. Between 2001 and 2021, the United States spent an estimated $2.3 trillion on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq alone. That figure comes from the Costs of War project at Brown University, one of the most cited academic institutions tracking this data. Add in the broader global war on terror across Syria, Somalia, Libya, Pakistan, and the Philippines, and researchers estimate the total figure rises to over $8 trillion when long-term veteran care and interest on war debt are included. In Afghanistan specifically, the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, known as SIGAR, documented over $19 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse in reconstruction spending alone. $19 billion in one country, on projects that often did not work, were never used, or simply disappeared. SIGAR reported ghost soldiers on the Afghan army payrolls. Bases built and immediately abandoned. Equipment was delivered to forces that did not exist. One report found that the U.S. spent $28 million on uniforms for the Afghan National Army, featuring a forest camouflage pattern. Afghanistan has no forests. This was not an accident. These were systems operating exactly as designed. The reaction from Congress, when these numbers began surfacing, was a pattern in itself. Hearings were called, officials testified, promises were made, and then, remarkably, the budgets kept growing. In 2018, following years of public pressure, the Pentagon finally underwent its first full independent audit. It failed. In 2019, it failed again. In 2020, failed. 2021, failed. 2022, failed. Each year, DoD officials appeared before congressional committees and explained that the department was making progress, that the systems were being reformed, that next year would be different. Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, had been raising alarms about Pentagon accounting since the 1990s. In a 2021 Senate hearing, he stated directly that the Pentagon's financial management was, in his words, The most serious financial management problem in the federal government. No criminal referrals followed. No senior official was removed for financial mismanagement. The audit failures were treated, in effect, as administrative inconveniences. But what Congress did not say loudly enough is this: an institution that cannot pass an audit cannot tell you with certainty where hundreds of billions of dollars have gone. And it has been in that condition for decades. Here is what they are not telling you. And this is where the documented facts become deeply uncomfortable. The companies that received the largest contracts during the post-September 11th wars were also among the largest political donors in Washington. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is a matter of public Federal Election Commission record. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop Grumman collectively received hundreds of billions in defense contracts between 2001 and 2021. These same companies collectively spent hundreds of millions on lobbying and political contributions during the same period. According to data from Open Secrets, a nonpartisan money and politics research group, the defense sector spent over $2.5 billion on lobbying between 2001 and 2021. The revolving door between the Pentagon and private defense contractors is documented and legal. Senior military officers retire and, within months, join the boards of the very companies whose contracts they once approved. This practice is so well established that it has a name inside Washington circles. It is called the revolving door, and it spins in one direction only, toward profit. The timing was not a coincidence. Layer 1 of this story is visible. A military fighting two wars simultaneously, spending at an emergency scale under wartime pressure. That is real. Layer 2 is systemic. A procurement and oversight structure that was never designed for accountability at this speed or this scale, with Congress incentivized to approve rather than question, because defense contracts meant jobs in home districts. That is also real and documented. Layer 3 is the part that gets almost no television coverage. The verified beneficiaries of 2 decades of unaudited military spending. The shareholders, the lobbyists, the board members, the retired generals now consulting for contractors. These individuals and institutions accumulated extraordinary wealth during a period when the DoD could not account for its own books. That is not speculation. That is the financial record. So what happens now? And what does history tell us about this pattern? The United States is currently in the middle of the largest defense budget in its peacetime history. The 2024 National Defense Authorization Act approved $886 billion in military spending. The Pentagon's audit failures continue. As of the most recent reporting cycle, DoD officials have acknowledged the department will likely not achieve a clean audit result until at least 2028 by their own internal projections. Meanwhile, new theaters of military investment are opening: the Pacific, AI-driven weapons systems, hypersonic missile programs, and space-based defense infrastructure. These are all real, all funded, and all operating within the same accountability framework that failed for 20 consecutive years in Afghanistan and Iraq. Expert consensus among defense economists, including researchers at the Stimson Center and the Project on Government Oversight, consistently identifies the same structural problem. There is no political cost for failure at the Pentagon. Until there is, the pattern will continue. And the American taxpayer, alongside the British taxpayer who funds NATO commitments linked to the same alliance architecture, will keep paying for a system that has never once proven it can account for itself. Here is the verdict. The loss of $2 trillion over 20 years of war was not a single event. It was not one corrupt official or one fraudulent contract. It was a system where the incentives rewarded spending over accountability, contracts over outcomes, and expansion over evaluation. The visible actors were generals, presidents, and secretaries of defense. The systemic force was a post-September 11th political culture that treated any question of military spending as unpatriotic. And the hidden beneficiaries were the defense contractors, lobbyists, and financial interests who understood exactly how to operate inside a system that had quietly stopped asking hard questions. The soldiers who served did so with honor. The families who lost loved ones deserve better than this. And the taxpayers on both sides of the Atlantic who funded it deserve, at the very minimum, a full account of where the money went. 20 years later, they still do not have one. This story is not finished. The audits are still failing. The budgets are still growing. And the questions are still unanswered. Was this a failure of oversight? Or was the lack of oversight the point all along? Let us know in the comments what you think. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.